Hi, I'm Sharon Landon, and welcome to Old Asian Lady. Today, my guest is Mrinal Gokhale. She is an author, speaker, and business analyst based in Wisconsin. She has written 2 anthologies about South Asian mental health, true stories of South Asians growing up in the West, navigating mental health stigmas, and her topics range from cultural identity, academia, socialization, to love, loss, and trauma. She shares her own mental health journey, reasons why she was not diagnosed as autistic until she was 20, the model minority myth, what inspired her writing, and how she is a successful professional woman today despite being neurodivergent. Mrinal, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know it's a little bit late over there since you're calling from, we have you here from Wisconsin. So yeah, thanks for stopping by and thanks for contacting me. I really appreciate you being on our show. And I just wanted to start off with you talking a little bit about your family background.
So my parents, I come from Indian parents. Specifically, my parents are from Maharashtra, India, and they came here as adults after they were married. And then I and my brother were born in the United States. Actually, Michigan is where I was born, and then Wisconsin is where I've lived since I was a 4-year-old.
Do you feel I identify more with being in, as an American, or do you identify with being Indian?
I guess if I had to choose American, but that doesn't mean that there's no elements of Indian culture in my life. So I would say that growing up, the culture inside my house was Indian and the culture outside my house was American, having grown up in a not so diverse suburb that was predominantly Caucasian populated.
When you say that you have the identity at home being Indian, was that something that you felt like you had to turn on and off?
In the sense that differences became more apparent as far as how I'm expected to behave around Indian family members as opposed to non-Indian family members outside of the house. And I think that having to find that balancing act between 2 cultures is something that a lot of us kids of immigrants have to deal with anyways growing up. And I think that developmentally speaking, I was taught that it is the norm to want to reject the culture from which you were born in, and want to just be American initially, but then have the desire later as an adult to want to incorporate both into your life.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the journey that I did, because I spent so much time rejecting the fact that I was Asian, because there's just no Asians really around me. And then I think it was only after I moved to Hawaii and there was a lot more Asians around. And of course, at that time I was in college, so it was more accepting of who I am. So growing up, I guess it sounds like you had a really typical parents that parented you in the Indian way. I mean, I know you're talking about the concept of model minority myth. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that?
So I would say that the way that I was raised under the Indian ideals, such as like not being allowed to have a boyfriend, not being allowed to stay out late at night, being expected to bring home nothing short of straight A's, or else being told that I'll amount to nothing and I'll be in poverty all my life, and being taught that STEM is what I should be aiming for and this and that as a career to be in. No talking back to elders, no matter what, that type of thing. That's what was modeled for me in childhood, much of it which I would openly reject.
Mm-hmm.
And model minority myth, I would say, is when I go back to how I said I was expected to bring home straight A's. So both my parents have engineering degrees. One has a master's, the other has a PhD. And I was taught that in order to get sponsored immigration wise to come down to the United States, a lot of Indian people or South Asian people do choose to do master's degrees in the United States because it's more economical in that sense. And in order to do that, in order to be employed and worthy of sponsorship, you have to show that you're a smart, hard worker with stellar grades. And then that mindset keeps on getting passed down intergenerationally, despite the fact that you might have had kids here that are already citizens and don't have to go through the same hurdles that you went through.
Right.
So then if you watch the television, or even in real life, if you keep seeing South Asian people that are doctors, lawyers, engineers, I was taught that things like engineering are fields in which they're considered practical and therefore easier to be able to gain sponsorship to come down here for immigration for, and that mindset keeps kind of getting transferred. And then doctors are super heavily respected in South Asian countries.
Yeah, I guess when there's the Asian thing attached, I think that's like a expectation that their kids become doctors or lawyers or whatever one of those
STEM fields.
Yeah, exactly. So then you really actually had a lot of pressure from your parents in terms of your education. Now you didn't. What did you end up studying?
I earned my bachelor's degree in marketing with a minor in journalism. And how that worked out is that growing up, language arts, English, writing, reading, spelling were my strong subjects. Things like science and math, things that involve problem solving and nonverbal comprehension were my weak subjects. As a learner, I'm the most talented and was in things like memorization of facts and data and vocabulary. And I think that my parents kind of had to just accept at a young age that I was not going to go on the path of STEM and that as badly as they wanted me to. So basically I wanted to be a writer. And then since my parents were helping me to pay, we came up with an agreement. They said that if I study business, it would be more practical in that sense to combine it with something writing related. So under the business school, I chose a major of marketing.
Okay. So you're currently doing marketing right now, is that right?
I did. So my career path went from digital marketing full-time, freelance news reporting on the side, wanting to break into full-time reporting, not being able to do so, then changing over from marketing to technical writing, and then becoming a business analyst during COVID full-time, and then at the same time becoming an author.
What do you prefer?
I feel like I went into marketing because it was a creative field and there were and still are aspects of it that I liked, but I felt as though I had to kind of sometimes push myself to act more extroverted than I really am. So in that sense, I feel like business analyst is a good career or field in the sense that sometimes it has some marketing elements to it if you're a marketing business analyst, and my writing skills are still useful in it. And I feel like I get to make use of my like logical and analytical skills, but also and work in things like tech, but not be like a programmer. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I get the healthy challenge as far as people management skills in that career, but also being able to utilize my personality and the skills that I already developed as a technical writer and a former marketer. Mm-hmm. So, and then being a business analyst affords me to be an author on the side.
Right. So we're talking about being author. You wrote 2 books now, right? Yes. And the first one you wrote was in how many years ago?
It was in 2021 and 2023.
Okay. That was that. I think you said that came out of the COVID situation. Yes. You had a lot of time to write. What inspired you to write? Because you wrote about the South Asian mental health. What was it that inspired you to write these stories?
So I was never necessarily intent on becoming an author. So basically, when I started my business analyst role, I was remote almost immediately in 2020, and I got the opportunity to take a free memoir writing course. And I did it. And then at the end, the teacher was like, if you want to publish your works, here's different methodologies of doing it. And then the idea of self-publishing came about, which I never knew about, and a lot of people still don't know about to this day. And then coincidentally, I met someone who self-published her own book on Amazon, just like myself. And so I was like, I would love to publish something, before I end age 30 in the next few months. And then I brainstormed topics of interest to me, and then psychology and minority mental health especially is something that I'm passionate about. And that's where I was like, writing other people's stories is kind of like being a journalist in that sense. So I tried it, and I've met lots of people willing to talk, so I went with it.
Okay, so I want to get in your books a little bit later, but I think for yourself, you grew up with autism, is that right?
Yes.
And how did that affect your life growing up? School, even work, I guess. I mean, we're saying growing up, but you're an adult when you went to work. But how did that affect your life during that time?
So I wasn't properly diagnosed until the age of 25. And throughout that entire time, I felt as though something was off in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on, never had an explanation or framework to understand myself or to advocate for myself to help others understand me. Academically, it affected me because year after year after year growing up, I would get in trouble for things like missing instructions, not following directions, not handing in homework on time. And teachers would chalk it up to not trying hard enough, and so would my family. And my brother, however, was diagnosed before the age of 2. He is going to live with my parents for the rest of his life, and he has the language skills of maybe a toddler, which I think is why he got diagnosed hard and fast.
So his situation, he has autism also?
Yes.
Okay. And his situation, it sounds like
he can't speak much.
I'm sorry?
He can't speak much.
Okay, so so you guys were on the extremes of autism spectrum?
Or I should, well, now the term is, are your support needs low, medium, or high? So he's a person that would have high support needs.
Oh, okay. So, and he was diagnosed at 2. And why was it that you were not diagnosed until you were 25?
I was a hyperverbal communicator. I had early speech language acquisition.
Okay. And talk about that in normal terms, because it's so medical, Can you
so I was speaking complete sentences before the age of 1.5, apparently.
Okay.
After the age of 1.5, my parents would notice things like if they asked me to say hello to someone, I would hide my face. And if they tried to push me, I would burst into tears, for example. I think they just thought it was social anxiety. And then the things I talked about in school, that was chalked up to not trying hard enough. Socially, I would notice, my family would notice, my parents would set up play dates with other kids. They would come over and then they would never come over again. That would continue. And then they would notice that if someone said hi to me, I wouldn't say it back. This would continue until and then my brother was going through speech therapy for years. When I was maybe a 3rd or 4th grader, the person who ran the clinic apparently said something to them like, I've noticed your daughter doesn't look at me. When I ask her a question, she doesn't answer it. She must have a very severe social anxiety. And that was kind of all that came of it. So, so basically, I had my first therapy at 20 years old as a college student with a graduate clinician. They diagnosed and treated me with social anxiety using exposure therapy tactics. And those worked, but I think that they were a Band-Aid solution in the grand scheme of things. And I noticed because while I made a lot of progress, my anxiety score itself reduced. When I went into the real world and graduated, I still sensed that something was off in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And what I meant is I could form friendships, but never close ones. Dating felt like a field impossible to navigate. When I would go through jobs, I would go through easy boredom. My issues with missing instructions would keep on coming up and about, and it would affect my performance. I was job hopping. I was making the same salary for 5 years straight. And then I went back to therapy. So I stopped the first therapy at 22, went back at 25, this time to a licensed professional. And within a few months, she was like, I like to look for patterns of behavior in my clients. The pattern I'm picking up with you is it seems you don't know how to read people and people don't know how to read you. And then she was like, I'm an expert, but even I can't read you sometimes. And then she was like, when you first came in here, you had this monotone voice, blank facial expressions, you smile, but not a lot. And at the end of sessions, you don't give me much feedback, even when prompted. And then she was like, and then you say that you've had discussions about you being shy, but I think it's a little more than that because you say autism runs in your family too, and I think you should be tested.
Okay. So when you talked about having social interaction difficulty, I mean, how did you handle that? I mean, with friends, because growing up, friends and things like that are quite important.
So as a kid, in elementary, middle, and high school, I didn't have a lot of close friends at all. As a middle and high schooler, I had friends like within the school system, like a group that I would hang out with in school, but I was still excluded a lot when it came to outings outside of school and fun things kids would do, like birthday parties and go and getting together and drinking and whatever. And I also experienced some teasing and bullying that would start going down every year as kids would mature. So then college gave me the opportunity to branch out a bit. And then by year number 2 of college is when I started the exposure therapy. And there they gave me scripts on how to approach people and talk to people and had me practice them in the real world too, which helped me immensely.
So you really just basically learn different scenarios, learn lines that you would just, say when such a certain situation comes up. So you wouldn't have to think about it too much.
Yeah, so I like that even if she didn't properly diagnose me, she had a willingness to work with the fact that I like scripts. And I think that until I got properly diagnosed, I was under the impression that every person in the world plans what they're going to say ahead of time and analyzes social situations afterward.
Okay. That's interesting. So this whole time that you're growing up, you said your parents just thought you were socially awkward. They didn't really think you were out of the norm of other kids. When you were actually diagnosed, I know you're in college and stuff already and an adult. What was their thinking about that? Did they ever say to you that they regretted not being able to help you in that way? Or was there any kind of feedback about that? No.
So I think that I think that I've noticed that if I come out with them with a list of bullet points of what I struggle with, they would agree. If I put a label on it, they would become defensive. And I've come to notice that, I think that a lot of people feel intimidated by the labels, but I feel like that might be a little bit more true in the older generations. And I don't know if maybe it's because I don't know if it's denial and not wanting to admit they have 2 kids on the spectrum due to stigma, or having a mindset of if you identify with the label, you're confining yourself to that and can't self-improve.
Yeah, how do you, I mean, because I know there's in Asian culture, there's quite a lot about face and stuff. So yeah, what you just mentioned about being out there, it would be losing face somehow in the public, and especially because you said your parents are quite successful in their career, chosen careers. So did you ever feel that you blame them in certain ways?
I feel that at the very least, they should have taken me into a child psychologist at some point in life. But again, there's a lot of things that play into role about why I wasn't taken in. I was a shy, quiet kid. I didn't disrupt the class. I was a female, and so on and so forth. So back then, being that I'm a 90s baby, there was a lack of education, and things like gender and racial bias do play that type of a role.
Yeah, one of my friends had, as an adult, actually, I found out that he was a borderline autistic. I mean, not autistic. He was a borderline Asperger. So in terms of autism and somebody that is that has Asperger syndrome, what is the difference actually? Because I feel like it's, I mean, for him, when I say borderline is that he functions quite normally, but I do know that he was a little bit socially awkward in terms of interacting with other people. However, his work and everything that dealt with his work, he was very good at. So yeah, what is the difference?
So Asperger's is thrown out of the DSM-5, and it's been years since it was thrown out of the DSM-5.
Okay,
the only reason was
is
diagnostics. This is called manual.
Okay. And it was thrown out.
Now it's just, I think they, so it was, the term Asperger syndrome was invented by a man named Hans Asperger's, who apparently I think was on a team of people to decide what people with mental illnesses to kill versus keep alive. And in 2015, I think, is when it got thrown out, and they were like, let's just call it one singular spectrum disorder.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, so it was thrown out, which means it's not
just autism. So then within that autism umbrella, you may or may not have intellectual development disorder and this and that. And that's, I guess the layman's term would be high functioning autistic, but a lot of people in the autistic community find functioning labels to be ableist. And now they're saying, try to call it high support needs versus medium or low support needs type thing.
Okay, so everything is just being a more politically correct type of way to define terms. I mean, because I came across neurodivergent. You're a neurodivergent. So how do people come up with these different names? I mean, people, I guess, like me, that are not necessarily affected by autism or things like that in my family, and I'm probably not politically correct, but it's just interesting to me that there's just so many different terms that it
is done with the intent to create acceptance, though. So the term neurodivergent stems from the movement of neurodiversity, which was invented by social psychologist Judy Singer in 2020, who was also autistic. Her framework around neurodiversity, which it's not a medical term, it's more so a movement or a framework, is that human beings are intrinsically diverse, racially, religiously, gender-wise, sexually, and neurologically diverse too. Mm-hmm. And no brain is better than the other brain, and no brain is totally alike. So her ideology was that anyone with any brain difference can identify as a person who is neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. But however, I feel like I'm seeing in the media that most people who identify as such have something neurodevelopmental, such as autism, ADHD, or learning disabilities, as opposed to something like psychiatric.
Right. See, when you explain that to me, it totally makes sense. Neurodivergent. You mentioned bullying earlier, and I wanted to touch a little bit about this because it's so prevalent in just, I guess, not even just in the States. I think everywhere there's some type of bullying. How did you handle that when you're being bullied?
I think that being shy, I was terrified to stand up for myself and would rely on others to do so or not do it at all. And that's something that has carried on to this day and something that is being addressed in therapy. And two, I will say that one thing that has helped me to come to terms with that is, so I have a friend with an autistic child, and she said that her occupational therapist that taught her that children bully because they want you to conform. They can sense something's different about you. And I think that helped me understand where people are coming from. And then it taught me too, things like someone else once told me, the pediatrician might see a child like me, and my pediatrician would, when my mother would say, I'm worried about how she doesn't have any friends, would simply say, oh, some kids like to be alone. And which that's valid, but it was more than that for me. And I feel like they might say a lot of pediatricians, they'll look at a baby. Are they looking at me when I speak to them? Do they respond to having their name called? Do they talk as much as other kids? They're good type thing. But the bullies in school will pick up the subtle differences in a heartbeat and exploit you for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like just a real magnet. I know one of my friends that had interviewed before, she had immigrated from Taiwan to Canada. And she went through this bullying type of thing. And it was really, her father had her stand up for herself, because that when somebody stands up for themselves, or is or or is able to do that, the bullies kind of back off. It takes away their power, I guess. So for you, it wasn't something that you were able to do because you didn't even necessarily have backup from your parents, so um, when you're just talking about this, I felt that there was some emotional things that still come up when you talk about that. I don't know if I heard it incorrectly, but the situations that you had growing up, does it still affect you uh, now, even though you're a successful professional woman with, author even?
In this, so I don't dwell on those things regularly because it's been so long, but I'm learning with my current therapist about how trauma lives in the nervous system, and how the part of your brain associated with the emotional side of your brain stores these experiences, and how things like, having experienced a lot of bullying as a kid, if you turn out to be a passive kid, you'll turn into a passive adult type thing.
So in terms of your own mental health and where you are at right now, do you feel that you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel that you are in terms of your own mental health or mental um, recovery, or the healing process of your situation?
Um, I think that my norm, or my homeostasis, is that I'm a privileged person who's successful and employed and educated, who doesn't have a high degree of problems. Um, However, I'm in EMDR therapy for a reason, and that's to address the wounds from the past and how they impact my future, things such as bullying, or being made to feel that I wasn't good enough. And after several months in it, I am experiencing a high degree of progress.
You were writing stories about uh, South Asian mental health, and why did you feel the drive to spotlight that specifically?
So my interest in psychology and minority mental health was the driving factor, as well as my journey with late diagnosis. So having been a freelance journalist, I worked for a Hispanic and Black-owned publication in my city, and I would write about my main events surrounded around mental health awareness in both communities. I talked about the stigma in both communities, but I felt like I never saw a single event in my city focused on bringing awareness of mental health in the Asian American community. And it made me think about how I didn't really know a lot of South Asian or Asian American people that had a therapy journey to share, such as my own. So I was like, this would be an interesting thing to investigate. I didn't think that I would meet anyone, but literally I just typed in hashtag South Asian mental health into the Instagram search bar, and all these results came up. And I literally just contacted nonprofits around it and was like, hey, looking to tell some stories for this book. Can you please put a submission call out and have people contact me if interested? And they did. And I think it's because COVID forced people, including in India, to finally start talking about mental health.
So your first book was it Saya, or how did
Unveiled.
Yeah, and then you wrote the second book. You said that there's a lot of people out there, and based on the people that you interviewed, what were the common themes, I guess, that you had in these
So
people?
the common themes that bonded all the stories together were experiences with things like model minority myth, the stigma and the culture, coming from having parents that immigrated over from a South Asian country, and then they were born there, having to educate their parents about mental health, things like academia, things like having uncomfortable or, difficult to navigate experiences in therapy when not working with someone that looks like them.
Mm-hmm. So for all of the people that you interviewed, they were categorized as specifically as being in therapy to get help for their situation, or was it just regular people that wanted to talk to you?
Both. I did not make it a requirement that to talk to me, you had to have a formal diagnosis of anything or have ever been through therapy. Some of them had neither, but still had experiences in life to talk about with experience regarding things like trauma, like anxiety, like suicide, like toxic relationships, that type thing.
And do you feel like that's part of the norm? I mean, in terms of South Asian culture, or is it just widespread? Any culture can have the issues that they went through that they're talking about.
I feel as though things like model minority may not be unique to South Asian people. It might be unique to a lot of Asian people.
Mm-hmm.
However, I feel like there would be subtle differences in terms of like how stigma was navigated and things like healthcare access and that kind of stuff. And obviously culture and religion.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, not a lot of people know that in India, language and culture changes every few kilometers that you travel. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that I made it a point in both books to spotlight a variety of South Asians from various religious communities, various countries in South Asia, various sub-ethnic communities in South Asia, that type of thing.
Okay, and then were the people that you told their stories about, were they, well, it sounds like they were dual nationalities, or was it
They were
States
like
or
second generationers.
Okay. Do you feel that people that were willing to share their stories with you, would that have been part of their healing process, to put it out there and to just say, hey, I had these issues, I'm talking it out? I mean, a lot of times people say when people have issues, any kind of issues, and Asians tend to keep it within inside them. And so speaking it out, do you feel like, or had you gotten any feedback from them that said it helped that you did that?
Yes, so some of them had already been speaking of their story to the world well before meeting me. And yeah, lots of them will say that helped them with their own healing to go against what they were taught all their life, which is that silence is strength.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I made it a point to tell people that they could change their name to protect themselves if needed, if they don't want the world knowing who they are. So there was a handful of people that took that option as well. I noticed that those who tend to give out their real name were ones that may perhaps work in the healthcare or mental health field already. And, telling their story to the world does enhance their brand in that way.
Oh, that's interesting that you say enhancing their brand, because I guess everybody has a personal brand. Yeah. So what is the biggest takeaway that you have for yourself in terms of having 2 books under your belt and writing about these stories?
I think that it opened whole new doors for me, and it not only helped me to build a brand, but to find self-healing as well, and in addition to more community of people like myself.
Mm-hmm. So I always like the term of community, because when you have community, it kind of connotates that you're part of something, you're
Right.
connected with something. Yeah. So one of the other things that I kind of want to touch on, which is a little bit aside from mental health, but I wanted to ask you about the process of writing the book and actually self-publishing it on Amazon, because I think, somebody like myself who thought, maybe I would write a book someday. Is it an easy process to do that on Amazon?
Self-publishing is economical and you get maximum creative control. If someone lacks tech savviness, that's a different story. They may need much help navigating Amazon and how to set that up. However, when it comes to self-publishing, the writing, the editing, the cover design, all that is on you. Luckily, having worked in marketing and having been a former journalist, I was already connected to editors, to graphic designers, and this and that. So that simplified the process for me in that sense. And I had someone who already that was already self-published on Amazon to help me with that.
Okay, so it's not as complicated a process. They just have to do a lot of Googling and research, and they can figure out how to do it, right?
Yes. If learning it that way works for you, yes. Some people might need the more. I'm glad that I got personalized support in some of the aspects of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, out of the whole process then of writing the book, what did you feel like was the most difficult? I mean, I'm not talking about publishing or anything, but writing these books and getting them published. What was the most difficult thing for you, if there was any?
I would say that finding balance in both books, as far as, so for book number 1, what was difficult was finding men that were willing to talk. There was 11 stories and only 2 people were men. And I tried asking so many different orgs and personal connections if they knew any South Asian men willing to talk. But I only found 2. But then by the time I wrote book number 2, I was well marketed and well networked enough to have met more people. And then, perhaps with time, men may have felt less insecure to talk about these things. Yeah. So I would say finding balance and variety was challenging. But by the time I wrote book number 2, I found multiple men that were willing to talk. I found people that identified as LGBTQIA plus willing to talk, which I didn't get any of in book number 1, for example. I think I found more people outside of just the country of India and South Asia willing to talk.
Yeah, interesting. I think a lot of times, you're mentioning men, they normally, even if they're normal, men don't talk necessarily as much. But the fact that you've got yourself out there and you have some kind of I wouldn't say authenticity. What is it? You've got credibility. Yeah, that they're willing to step out. Now, writing these books and getting them out there, what do you feel that this has done for you personally in terms of your path or your career?
I feel that it has given me healing and community, as we discussed, in the sense that finding pride in my culture has been a lifelong challenge in terms of having wanted to reject it growing up. And I think the reason for that is, having an intuition about me that I was different, not knowing the reason why. And then on top of that, receiving messages that being different is a bad thing and that Indian culture is all about the things that I'm not able to do, kind of made me reject it. And I was so used to seeing South Asian people portrayed in one way growing up, and that was under the confines of model minority myth. Writing my book showed me otherwise, which gave me an increased pride in my culture and in identifying as a person that's South Asian.
So you're doing some speaking now about the topic.
Yes, so such as through podcasts such as this. I've done writing workshops before. I have been on panels alongside other authors before, other mental health professionals before.
So do you enjoy the aspect of being publicly out there, especially since growing up you were more introverted, because now it seems like you have to learn to be a little bit more extroverted?
Yes, and I think that as a person who is neurodivergent, someone who knows me well will say to you that I do like to talk. It's more so just about meticulous things. And maybe that's something you observe in your autistic friend too.
Yeah.
So that's where, this is a topic of passion of mine. And as far as getting through the fear of putting myself out there like I am now, practice did make perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to share with us that is your wow, that maybe can help somebody out there that's listening that maybe had the same issues or some similar issues that you had growing up?
For those who had the same or similar issues as me growing up, I would say if you're an adult, look at the support services out there and what you're able to access. If you can't access testing or support services, that's totally valid. Instead, start educating yourself through the virtual communities that are out there already, such as support groups, such as social media groups, such as pages on here that talk about different forms of neurodivergence.
Okay. And how about anything personally, just that you want to get out there?
Just that we in the Asian American diaspora just have to keep on having these uncomfortable conversations.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing really some of your story with us. And I think what you're doing out there is going to obviously help a lot of people. So really support you on that. But thanks again for coming on the show. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Old Asian Lady. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.